Endurance Junkie Podcast, episode 62. Hey Junkie, welcome to another episode of the Endurance Junkie Podcast, the show where I will be interviewing some of the fastest, smartest, and most inspiring people active in the endurance world today. Dylan Bowman is an American ultra runner who has placed in the top 10 at Western States several times and won multiple 100-milers across the globe. This year he raced his first UTMB and finished 7th in what must have been the most competitive ultra running race in the history of the sport. Dylan, thanks for joining me today. Now, first of all, congratulations on your wedding. How was the honeymoon? Did you guys go somewhere with a lot of trails, or was it just 100% R&R?
Cool. Thanks for having me, Peter. And yeah, thanks for the congratulations. The wedding was just absolutely incredible, an ultra marathon in its own right. And we didn't do any major honeymoon at this point. As you know, I'm just kind of returning from a big trip to Europe where I had a major race, but we got married in Colorado, and then after our wedding, we did go to a little place outside of Telluride for 3 nights, really luxurious, kind of rustic lodge out in the back country called Dunton Hot Springs, and there were plentiful trails, lots of great running, a lot of great hiking, a lot of good food and drinks. So yeah, it was an excellent sort of mini honeymoon, and we'll probably do something a little bigger next year. But yeah, I'm still on a high from the whole wedding experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. For those of us who don't know you, can you start off by telling us a bit about yourself, your sporting background growing up in Colorado, and how you ended up in ultra running?
Sure, yeah. So I did grow up in Colorado. I live in the Bay Area now, but as a kid, I was always a team sport athlete. So I played lacrosse mostly through my childhood, and specifically in high school and college. That's where I kind of had the most success. And so, yeah, I played lacrosse until I was about 22 or so when I graduated from college. And then at that point, for the first time in my life, I no longer had the outlet of organized sport and the competition and the camaraderie and just the general fitness and stress relief that comes from being active every day. And so I picked up running, shortly after I graduated. Really, again, just to have a daily outlet. I've always been somebody who thrived on going to practice every day, doing something to sweat and stay active. So running seemed to be the easiest way for me to kind of have that outlet. I always enjoyed running growing up, and playing lacrosse. My role on the team was to sort of be the hustle guy on the field, the guy who covered a lot of ground. So I've always been a decent runner, but never did it in any organized way. So, again, after I graduated from college, I just started running for fun and to stay in shape. And then, of course, you start learning about these events, and you can't help but have a little curiosity about it. And so, I did a couple sort of shorter trail races, and eventually heard about the Leadville 100, and at that point, I was completely enthralled with the idea of running 100 miles in a single push, and that curiosity sort of was an obsession of mine then for about a year, until I finally had the opportunity to line up and race Leadville there in 2010. And so, yeah, since then, it's gotten more and more serious every year, and it's now obviously a big part of my life and my livelihood. And I'm so thankful looking back, because I never thought this would be the life I would have at this point.
Now, there's a pretty big difference between lacrosse and towing the start line at Leadville. How did that transition go for you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like there's a lot that's different between the two sports, but I think playing lacrosse and really not being a serious runner until later in life has actually worked to my advantage in that I don't carry a lot of wear and tear or, chronic injuries that I might have had I started running when I was a kid. And, being an athlete, being athletic, I think lends itself to trail running because every step that you take is a little bit different. You're going uphill and downhill, so it's changes in intensity, not to the same degree that you get in field sports, but certainly not something that's totally foreign to me. So, it was completely different, and there was a massive learning curve when I first got into the sport, and it did take me a little while to figure things out, like pacing and nutrition and just building up general endurance fitness. But yeah, with experience and with the right guidance, through my coach, I was able to improve really quickly. And that first experience at Leadville was a total life changer. And, of course, like everybody else, I vowed to never do it again. And then 2 weeks later was obsessed with the idea of doing it again. And now, here we are 7 years later and doing it, several times a year.
So was that Leadville race a real turning point in your career? And is that when you realized that, I can make it as a pro?
I think to a certain degree, it gave me some confidence just that, I could do it as something that would be a little bit more than a hobby. Of course, things have evolved in our sport a lot since I got into it. And I think I came into it at a really good time, sort of as it was becoming more professionalized. And every year it gets more so. I still never envisioned that I would be doing it professionally, after doing Leadville the first time. I was surprised that I was able to finish on the podium that first year, really only a year after starting running in any sort of organized way. So from that standpoint, I was really excited about seeing where I could go in the sport and seeing how much I could improve and, how well I could do at certain races. So I think, certainly my family was really surprised by it too. But, still having finished third in Leadville in 2010, it wasn't as if I then thought to myself, wow, maybe I should make a go of this as a professional. It sort of just kind of came about organically over many years, and pretty much every year has just gotten a little bit more serious than the last, and every year I've gotten more support and more opportunity to travel and do races and far off places I never really thought I'd have the opportunity to visit. And so it's been an amazing, amazing whirlwind. And again, something I never would have envisioned for myself. But yeah, I guess to answer your question, after Leadville 2010, I was really excited to continue in the sport and to do more races. But no, I still didn't think that it was going to be something I would pursue professionally. And that didn't come about for a few more years.
Have you always been a coached athlete, or were you figuring things out by yourself?
In the beginning, yeah, I definitely was figuring it out on my own. As a lacrosse player and as a team sport athlete growing up, I'd always responded really well to coaching. I always got along really well with the coaches that I had in various team sports. But when I got into running, again, because I wasn't really taking it that seriously, it was all just genuinely about staying in shape and doing something to keep me occupied. And because I had been an athlete my whole life, it wasn't really, I wasn't super ambitious about performing well in races. And then when I figured that I, had some potential in the sport, it, still took me a couple of years to come to the realization that I could be a lot better with the proper guidance. So after 2 or 3 years in the sport, where I was just kind of self-coached and generally not doing anything that would resemble structured training, at least in a strategic way. I mean, I wasn't doing any real intensity. I would just kind of go out, figure out how long I wanted to go based on how much available time I had during the day, and really train without any real method. And I was then motivated to reach out to the coach who I've now been working with for probably 4 or 5 years now, Jason Koop, after an injury in 2013. And it was incredible after getting to know him and train with strategy and train with a professional coach. It was incredible how much I was able to then improve, shortly thereafter. And so I really wish I would have reached out to a coach a little bit earlier in my career, but at the same time, I think it was good for me to have a couple years where I just sort of learned on my own and gained experience before I got really serious about it. But now, I have a coach and we work together really, really well. We've been together, I guess, now 4 years. And I would certainly encourage people to go that route if they're looking to improve in the sport as well.
You train by feel, right? You don't use a heart rate monitor. Is that something that you've always done, or is that something that your coach imposed when you started working with him?
Sure, yeah. So before I was coached, again, I was totally ignorant about training philosophy, and I didn't really even know kind of what intervals were, what a fartlek was, any of those kind of running terms. Again, growing up as a team sport athlete, I just was totally, I was not exposed to any proper endurance coaching. And so when I was sort of just going it alone and, being self-coached, for lack of a better term, I really had no strategy at all other than, if I was getting ready for a 100-miler, I would go on long runs. I never did any intensity in my training. So it was all very low intensity aerobic type work. I probably didn't do enough specificity in my training. So not enough, vertical, and not exposing myself enough to technical terrain, things like that I've learned from my coach now. But no, I've actually never worn a heart rate monitor. I've never gone off heart rate or pacing in my daily training. What we do is go off perceived effort. And so if I'm doing intervals, either if I'm doing sort of VO2 max type work, it's basically a 10 out of 10 perceived exertion. If we do more threshold tempo type work, it's more of an 8 out of a 10 type effort. And then obviously we do some work a little slower than that at 7 out of 10, I would guess. But yeah, it's all based on RPE. And in Jason Koop's book, he has a really good explanation as to why he works off RPE rather than heart rate. I wouldn't be able to do it justice here in this podcast, but I would certainly recommend his book to all of your listeners who might be interested in his training methods, because it is very intuitive and very simple, which is, I think, why we work so well together, because that's kind of the style I like to employ in my training as well.
Yeah, sounds like he's a perfect future guest, so I'll definitely get in touch with him, and I hope to have him on the show pretty soon. Now, of course, you raced Leadville. You had some pretty good results since then. You podiumed in Western States several times, and you've won races left and right across the globe. But this year you raced your first UTMB. You finished 7th there. What did you expect going in? And take us through your race day.
Sure. Well, just to back up a little bit, I knew I wanted to make UTMB kind of the focal point of my season this year, early on in the year. And so I kind of planned my whole life around doing what I thought was necessary to train for it appropriately. And since I live in coastal Northern California, I thought it would be important for me to relocate for most of the summer, just so I could be in the mountains and train on terrain more similar to that which you find on the UTMB course in the Alps. So I picked up and moved with my dog back to Colorado for the 7 weeks before the race, where I did a lot of slow and steep type training in the Rocky Mountains to try and mimic, again, the terrain that I would encounter in the Alps. So I did everything I could in training to prepare for the specific demands of the race. And so for that reason, I arrived in Chamonix, pretty confident in my training. But of course, it was probably the most competitive ultramarathon race in the history of the sport, just based on the level of competition and the athletes that were on the start list. So, to answer your question about what my expectations were, I expected to have a good race just because I was confident again in my training. But it wasn't as if I had expectation of okay, I better finish in the top 5 or the top 10. Really, I just was expecting to have a good, solid race. And my whole goal was to minimize mistakes. And for the most part, I was able to do that. Of course, like any 100-mile race, you can always find something to improve for the future. And my race was no different. While it was really solid and something I was really satisfied with, I definitely am looking forward to having the opportunity to go back and improve on my performance from this year.
Okay, so is that your goal for next year?
Well, we'll see. I may not be able to make it back next year, which I think might be a good thing, just because I dedicated so much to it this year. It might be good for me to just take a deep breath and do something different next year, and then reapproach it with fresh eyes again in 2019. But we'll see. I haven't really planned out my 2018 season too far yet, but bottom line is I'm really excited to return to UTMB at some point, and I'm confident I can do better there.
How do you recover from a race like that? What's your recovery strategy?
Well, I think this year was just a little bit different because, as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I got married 2 weeks after UTMB. So in the 2 weeks between the race and the wedding, I was very inactive. We were tying up loose ends before the wedding, and generally I just was not in any way physically or mentally prepared for or desiring any sort of physical activity. Typically, I would take maybe a week off and then, start doing low intensity, very easy runs, 4 or 5 days a week. I think after UTMB this year, I took almost 2 weeks of almost complete nothingness. I did a couple short runs and hikes in the couple days leading up to the wedding, just to blow off some steam, just to be prepared for the emotional roller coaster of the whole wedding experience. But really, I wasn't doing any active recovery, anything like that. I did get a few massages and sat in the creek in Aspen, Colorado, where we got married, a few times, just to help with the inflammation from the race and from the travel home. I obviously ate a lot of food. I probably drank a little bit too much alcohol in those couple weeks. But I think it was actually a really good thing to schedule my wedding immediately after the race, just because I didn't have any motivation to be active, and I didn't feel the pressure to get out the door and go running that I probably would have felt had I gotten married in July, say, before the race, things like that. So, I think generally speaking, my recovery strategy is just to eat and drink a lot, try and catch up on a lot of sleep, which I really focused on, especially in the few days upon returning to the States after UTMB. I spent probably 2.5 days in bed just to try and deal with the jet lag and the exhaustion of the whole race and travel experience. So it's nothing too bizarre, too outlandish. Just eat, sleep, and rest.
So that's 2017 done for you, or do you have something lined up for the remainder of the year?
It's a good question. Something I'm still trying to figure out myself. There's a couple races that interest me coming up here in the fall. One is the North Face 50 Mile Championship here in Marin County, which is a race I've done 4 times. It's right in my backyard. So I'm now back in California for the foreseeable future, and live and train on the trails that are used in that race. So I'd really like to do it again. This year, it's sort of a quick turnaround from UTMB. I'd probably need to start getting back into serious training here pretty quickly if I wanted to have any shot at doing well. And if I'm not feeling up to that one, there's a race in Cape Town, South Africa called Ultra Trail Cape Town, which is really appealing to me. That's a couple weeks later in December. But at this point, my next for sure goal, I think, is going to be the Hong Kong 100K in January. So if I'm not feeling up to either the North Face 50 miler or Ultra Trail Cape Town, I'll probably aim at that Hong Kong 100K at the beginning of 2018.
So nothing beyond that. I mean, you said you haven't figured out your 2018 season yet, but do you have like a bucket list of races that you want to do in the near future?
Oh, absolutely. And every year there seems to be more races to add to the bucket list. As you know, the sport's really growing right now internationally, and there's lots of amazing opportunities to travel around and do races in countries and in places that I haven't had an opportunity to visit and that I'd really like to go to. One race that I have been to a couple of times, though not as a competitor, is the Hard Rock 100 miler that's in Colorado in a small old mining town called Silverton. And you probably have heard of it. It's a classic 100-mile race, but it's incredibly difficult to get into. They only allow 145 runners, I think, into the field every year. And now, since I did UTMB this year, I finally have a legit qualifier to enter that lottery. So I'd love to get into that race next year. That's in July. So beyond Hong Kong, I think that the next kind of decision will be made based on whether or not I get into Hard Rock. There's other cool races around the world that I really want to do, and just to mention them briefly, I'd really like to go back to Ultra Trail Mount Fuji, which is a race I did last year in Japan. But unfortunately, due to really nasty weather, they had to shorten the race from 100 miles to about 50 kilometers. So it ended up being a very much shorter race than we anticipated and that I had trained for. So I'd like to go back and do that full course. There's also a new UTMB race in China, in Western China, that looks to be really interesting. That's in March. So those are just a few races that I have on my radar for next year. And of course, I could name probably 5 or 10 others that I'd really like to do over the next few years.
Oh, yeah, that's a nice bucket list. And as you mentioned, I mean, the sport is booming. So there's new races being organized all over the globe. And it must be fun to travel the world like that and do these amazing races. Now, you've only been active for 6-7 years since that first Leadville podium. But what do you see as your biggest achievement so far in your career? And looking at the other side, what's your biggest disappointment or your biggest regret?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when I think about my biggest achievement, one of the things that I think I've been able to do well is just to be pretty consistent year in and year out. I haven't had any major wins of races like UTMB or the North Face 50 miler or Western States, but I've gotten fairly close in all those races, and I've managed to win a few other races around the world. And so I'd love to have the opportunity to continue racing at a high level for many more years and maintain that consistency. I think maybe my best race ever. This year's UTMB would probably be up there, but I would say my 2014 race at Western States 100 here in California, where I finished third, that was definitely a highlight of my career. I also, in 2015, won a race in Australia called the Ultra Trail Australia that was 100 kilometers. A race I didn't anticipate winning, and that I managed to win in course record time, which looking back was probably my best executed performance for a number of different reasons. So those are two major highlights, and then I think the major disappointment in my career was then in Western States 2015. So the year after I finished third, I returned to Western States, and I had high expectations for myself. A lot of other people had high expectations for me since I'd been on the podium the year before and had been improving at the race every year. And I just came in maybe a little bit overcooked, and for whatever reason just didn't have any gas on race day, and was forced to drop out about 55 miles into the race. And of course, that's one of the biggest events on the international ultra running calendar every year, and it's a race that holds a special place in my heart. So it was really disappointing to have to pull out of that race. It's still my one and only DNF in my career, which is tough to swallow as well, because I've been now in the sport for a good while now, and I've probably got almost 50 ultra marathons under my belt. And I used to have a lot of pride in the fact that I never dropped out of a race. I think I was a little bit too smug about that, and the universe came back to bite me. And so anyway, I haven't returned to Western States in the last 2 years since then. But I definitely look forward to at some point redeeming myself there, because I think that's definitely the biggest disappointment I've had in my career.
Okay, so there's some unfinished business there to take care of.
Right.
Now, you still have a full-time job, right? You're not just a full-time runner.
No, I do work. Full-time. I work for a company that's based in New York City. So I work out of my house here in California. I work for a company called Hypoxico Altitude Training. So we do simulated altitude technology. And that takes up a good amount of my time every week. Of course, it is flexible since I get to work from home and can pretty much work on the road as well. So it's a really good fit for my lifestyle. It allows me to train like a fully professional runner, while still having the accountability and productivity of having a job, which is something I really enjoy, and which I think allows me to approach my daily training with a better attitude, just because it's not my overall career. I don't have to put so much pressure on myself with running in order to pay the bills and make ends meet. So I still work, and I don't anticipate ever, quitting my day job to pursue running full time. I just don't think that would work well with my personality.
Do you feel you need to make certain sacrifices to be able to combine those two and still lead the life of a pro athlete?
I honestly don't think I do have to make many sacrifices. I have a really good situation. I'd be lying if I, didn't emphasize how fortunate I am to have the work situation that I do, because my colleagues are all super supportive of my racing and traveling. I never feel pressured to, work. To sacrifice my career as a runner in order to be successful with my actual day job. So, I just got married, but we don't have kids yet or anything like that, in which case there'd probably need to be some sacrifice made in some regard. But at this point in my life, it's a really perfect fit whereby, like I said, I can train as much as I want. as much as I need to, while also having the time commitment and productivity that having a real full-time job allows. And again, I don't have to commute, which is great. Saves me a lot of time compared to most people who live here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so, yeah, for a lot of reasons, it's been a pretty perfect arrangement for me. And I've been working for Hypoxico now for more than 4 years. And I can't say enough good things about working for the company.
Yeah, and it definitely works for you. All right, that's about the half-hour mark, Dylan. I was going to finish the show with a couple of short and easy, silly questions, but we're taping this the day after the Vegas shooting, so I'll probably skip that section. What's the atmosphere like in the Bay Area and in the U.S. at the moment?
Man, it's really sad. I mean, it's now just about noon here on Monday morning, and the shootings happened pretty late last night. So, I haven't really talked to many people, but just judging from the information that's come out and the internet's reaction, it's just another incredibly sad event that seems to happen in the U.S. Every year or so. So, it's really sad for all of us to wake up to more news like this, and I think it's just a real shame. But nothing we can do aside from just continue to fight for what's right and be good to your neighbors and try and be a good person. So that's what I'll try and focus on.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do here in Europe as well. I mean, we've got some incidents here as well on a regular basis, and it's always tragic and terrible, but we got to keep moving forward and try to do the good thing.
Right.
All right, Dylan, how can people get in touch with you if they want to?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So, I'm on Twitter and Instagram pretty actively, where my handle is at DylanBo, DYLANBO. My website is dylanbowman.com. I try and update that whenever I have something interesting to share. And I'm on Strava as well, so you can look me up there. I post all my training. It's been very light recently, as I mentioned here in our conversation. But those are probably the best places to follow me. And obviously happy to correspond with anybody who wants to have a conversation about training or racing or any of that stuff. So don't hesitate to reach out.
All right, cool. I'll put those links up on the show notes page. Feel free to give some love to your sponsors or partners.
Yeah, sure. So, my main sponsors are the North Face, which is based here in the Bay Area as well, who I've been working with for about 3 years, and obviously a legendary outdoor company who's been super supportive of our sport since the beginning. I also work with Red Bull, who's been an incredible sponsor for me as well. We've been working together for just about a year, but they've been just incredible in terms of their support and resources and opportunities and just the ability to help me become a better athlete. So I'm eternally grateful for both of those brands, and I would encourage everybody to support them as well, as they both provide a lot of value for our sport and for endurance sport in general.
Awesome. Anything else you want to plug?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered most of the interesting stuff. So I appreciate you having me on. It's been fun.
Thanks for your time, Dylan. Much appreciated. Junkie, thanks for listening to this episode with Dylan Bowman. I'm sure we'll be seeing him on a lot more podiums in the coming years. Now, if you like what you've just heard and don't want to miss any future episodes, please head over to iTunes or Stitcher and subscribe to the show. There's 2 ways to do that. You can either search for Endurance Junkie Podcasts on Google, or you can head over to the podcast website, junkiepodcast.com, and you will find all the correct links there as well. While you're at it, and if you have some spare time, leave me a rating and a review as well. That would be much appreciated. There's a contact section on the website as well, so if you have ideas for improvement or possible future guests, drop me an email. I would love to hear from you guys. All right, thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll join me next time. Cheers.